Your band of adventurers has been traveling through this arid wilderness for days. Shelter has been scarce under the blazing sun. Ahead of you, the horizon is broken by dozens of rock formations, remnants of ancient volcanic activity. Picking up your pace, you look forward to a bit of shade in the midst of the rocks. Upon approach, you can see hundreds of openings carved into the rocks, some quite high. They appear to be the remnants of a forgotten settlement. The air is still and silent, yet you can't shake the feeling that you're being watched. Hi everyone, I'm Thane Gibson and welcome to DMing the World. On this episode of DMing the World, we're going into the wilderness to talk about how you can make outdoor locations in your TTRPG more engaging. Now before we get started, I want to remind you to stick around to the end for the DMing the World toolbox, where I'm going to give you some writing prompts that can help you get started making more engaging outdoor locations immediately. When I ask you to think about what the wilderness looks like in a D&D game, what do you think of? I would imagine for many of you, it would be something like a well-trod road through a forest. It's a great place for bandits to attack, to meet a traveling merchant, or find a goblin camp. But inevitably, it's seen as a transitory location between bigger adventures. In modern fantasy role-playing, the wilderness is the domain of the random encounter. Traveling through the wilderness can be tedious, and at times it's simply hand-waved to get to the next chapter of the story. But if we look at the roots of the fantasy genre, we find things like The Lord of the Rings, where the majority of the action takes place in the wilderness. Or the classic Tales of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser by Fritz Leiber, where the heroes must survive a harsh environment to get the treasure. The wilderness can be its own adventure, but in order to do so, we have to make it interesting. Now, to get started, let's lay the groundwork about what the current state of wilderness travel looks like in modern TTRPGs. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is supposedly built on 3 pillars: role-playing, combat, and exploration. Now, of those 3 pillars, most people would agree that exploration has been underrepresented in 5th edition. There have been several creators who have discussed this and put forth their own house rules for handling overland travel. There have also been third-party products that try to fill in the gaps with either wilderness encounters or rules designed specifically for overland travel. This lack of exploration is one of the reasons why the OSR movement has become so popular. People missed that part of role-playing games from the old days. And we now have several fantastic OSR games that have overland travel built into their core rules. Specifically, OSR games often focus on the hex crawl, where an overland map is divided into hexagons that represent small sections of that map. The adventurers then travel from hex to hex and discover what's there. It might be a new dungeon, a new town, or an army of bloodthirsty orcs. Taking it a step further, we have the concept of a West Marches campaign. A West Marches campaign is solely focused on the hex crawl framework. It allows for discovery, exploration, and quick generation of adventures. It also eliminates the need for a consistent group of players. Instead, whatever players show up can explore the next hex and decide if they want to deal with that or not, or go back to a location that they had previously discovered and added to their map and deal with it instead. If you want to learn more about a West Marches campaign, there's a plethora of creators who've already covered it. I personally would recommend Matt Colville's summary video to get you started. However, in my early experiments with hex crawls and West Marches campaigns, I discovered a hidden truth. Hex crawls can be very boring. For example, let's say the party enters a new hex. The GM will then either consult a pre-made chart or roll to see what's in that hex. They'll roll for the terrain, what kind of features are there, and they might roll for inhabitants. Now, this can provide for hundreds of combinations, but after a while, it starts to sound like the same thing over and over again. This hex contains a forest, a village, and a bandit camp. The next hex contains a forest, a troll, and a dungeon. You want every area to have something interesting in it to make it worth the player's time. But if you make every area interesting, then what differentiates one area from another? If you leave blank areas, then your players just spent that much time traveling and not accomplishing anything. This could end up leading to players looking at their phones instead of paying attention. So how do we make the wilderness more engaging? Well, let's start by looking at the world around us. Setting has a lot to do with engaging terrain. If your campaign takes place in a small area of the world, then the terrain is going to be more homogeneous. If it's a temperate area like the eastern US or Western Europe, then it will be forests, fields, hills, mountains, that sort of thing. To many of you, this may seem too familiar or too bland. So why not change things up a little bit? Set your campaign somewhere more interesting, like Cappadocia, where the introductory hook at the beginning of this video took place. Cappadocia is a historical name for a region in central Turkey. It sits on a high inland plateau. The summers are hot, the winters are cold, and rain is sparse. Volcanic rock formations break up the arid terrain, and its ancient inhabitants adapted to the environment by carving dwellings into the stone pillars. Using a landscape like this can change your entire setting. Those bandits, merchants, and goblin camps from the forest road that we talked about would look quite different in this setting. They might even look fresh in your player's eyes, and all you did was change the backdrop. For the opposite, consider an Arctic or tundra setting like Iceland. The terrain of Iceland varies between active volcanic zones, broad tundra expanses, and rocky cliffs that are carved out by waterfalls from melting glaciers. And that's all on an island that's slightly smaller than my home state of Tennessee. And that brings us to my second piece of advice. After you start thinking about unique landscapes, start varying those landscapes. Iceland is a great example of just how diverse a small area can be. Don't be afraid to change things up. Even in the case of that temperate region that we were just talking about, those forests and fields, hills and mountains can all look quite different. Here's a map of Tennessee where I live. We have 3 distinct regions in our state that are roughly divided topographically. West Tennessee is fairly flat with some rolling hills in the north. It has some swampy areas in the southwest near the Mississippi River lowland. Middle Tennessee is more hills and bluffs along the area known as the Highland Rim, which is cut by all of the rivers that flow through the area. East Tennessee starts with the Cumberland Plateau, a steep elevation change that drops again into the wide Tennessee Valley, and then continues east into Rocky Foothills, and finally the Appalachian Mountains. Each of these regions are less than 200 miles across. That's roughly 10 days of travel in D&D terms. To cross the whole state, it would take about a month. That's a lot of variety just in my local area, and I bet you would find the same thing in your own area. Lastly, let's talk about unique terrain features. The rock dwellings in Cappadocia that we introduced at the beginning are carved into a geological feature called a hoodoo, or fairy chimney. These can be found all over the world and are caused by erosion. They have a wide variety of shapes and can form in any climate. Building an encounter around a group of these hoodoo creates cover for combat, a chance for mysterious ruins or ancient carvings, or a chance for role-playing with someone that dwells amongst them. Note that is all 3 pillars of D&D, by the way. These could even be along that well-trod road that we were talking about at the beginning. And if you put them there, then you created something unique out of something basic. Here are a few more geological features that you can look to for inspiration. The Dolomites in the Italian Alps. Devil's Tower in Wyoming. The Reshat structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara in Mauritania. The Dragon Trees of Socotra Island off the coast of Yemen. And the cenotes of the Yucatan. To wrap things up, let's dig into the DMing the World toolbox so you can get started using the world around you to inspire more interesting locations for your RPG setting. But before we do, if this video has already sparked ideas for you, make sure to give it a like to let me know that you want more content like this, and turn on notifications for the channel so you don't miss any future episodes. If you'd like to support DMing the World, make sure to subscribe to the channel and visit our website where you can find more DMing the World content. You can also buy something from our affiliate links or purchase some merch from our store. Now let's get back to the DMing the World toolbox. So first off, what is the type of terrain that you want to build in? Are there any unique examples of that already exist in the world? Does that terrain exist in only one climate, or can it exist in multiple? How do the seasons impact it? What does the weather look like there? And can you use it in your encounter? What are the associated types of terrain? If it's a forest, are there hills or mountains or swamps that are either adjacent to it or scattered throughout it? Who lives there? Why? And how? Why is it unique? Are there outside forces, either naturally or intentionally, that have made it unique? Are there examples of unique geological structures that exist in that terrain? And if not, research some and see if you can add those in. Lastly, add in your own fantastical flavor and make it your own. Change up the colors or the flora or the fauna. Breathe life into it. As you walk through these prompts, try to visualize that place in your head, and then either write down or sketch out descriptive phrases that can help you build encounters later on. That's it for this episode about the wilderness. I'd love to revisit the topic down the road and talk about my own personal overland travel methods. If that's something you'd be interested in, let me know in the comments below. Now that we've journeyed through the wilderness, we've reached our destination. Grab your torches, because next time we're going to be crawling in some dungeons. Until then, keep DMing the world.